You will beg for mercy before this is done, the Duke of Hawkmoor said, and he meant it as a kindness, the only warning he intended to give. Lavinia Crewe did not flinch. She stood in the center of his drawing room in a gown 3 winters old, her gloves mended at one fingertip, and she smiled at him as though he had complimented the weather. "How fascinating," she said. "I have never begged for anything in my life. I should be curious to learn how it is done. Perhaps you might demonstrate." For a moment Roland could not speak. He was a man before whom strong men lowered their eyes, whose displeasure had ended careers and silenced ballrooms. He had expected tears or trembling, or the grasping deference shown him by every fortune-hunting family in 3 counties. He had not expected to be offered instruction in humility by a penniless woman who reached not his shoulder. "You understand your situation," he said, recovering. "Your father's debts are mine to forgive or to call. Your name is at my mercy. This betrothal is a charity Miss Crewe arranged so that your sisters may eat. I should think gratitude more becoming than impertinence." "Gratitude," she repeated, as though tasting the word and finding it lacking salt. "I am grateful, your grace, that you find my family's ruin so convenient to your purposes. A wife who cannot say no is a great economy. You shall save a fortune on argument." She tilted her head. "But I do not see how I am at your mercy. You require a duchess who will not embarrass you. I require bread for my sisters. We are 2 merchants haggling, nothing more. Mercy does not enter into a fair trade." Roland set down the glass he had been holding before he was tempted to grip it too hard. He crossed to the window and looked out over the long lawns of Hawkmoor, the avenue of limes, the grey reach of the lake. He had brought her here meaning to break her gently to the bridle, to make her grateful and quiet, and to forget her between the duties of his days. He had a great house and no warmth in it, and he had told himself he wanted nothing more than silence at his table. "You are bold," he said to the glass, "for a woman with nothing." "I have a great deal," Lavinia answered. "I have my wits, which are my own, and my pride, which no creditor can seize. You may have my hand, sir, since you have purchased it. You may not have my fear. It is the one thing I have refused every man who ever tried to take it, and I do not mean to make you the exception merely because your house is larger." He turned then and looked at her properly. She was not a beauty in the fashion the season prized. She was too thin, and there was a stubbornness about her mouth that no drawing master would have praised. But her eyes were direct, grey and clear, and they did not slide away from his the way the eyes of frightened people did. They met him. They weighed him. It had been a long time since anyone had dared to weigh him and not find him wanting. "We shall see," he said, "whether your pride survives a month under my roof." "We shall," she agreed pleasantly. "I should be glad of the wager. What are the stakes?" He very nearly laughed. He caught it in time. The month did not go as he intended. He had thought to wear her down with the small cruelties of grandeur. He seated her at the far end of his vast table, and she remarked that the distance was a mercy, for it spared her his frowning over the soup. He gave her the coldest of the guest rooms, hung in funereal blue, and she thanked him gravely for so faithfully matching the chamber to her opinion of the marriage. When his steward was slow to bring her firewood, she did not complain. She appeared at breakfast having clearly slept in her travelling cloak, cheerful as a robin, and observed that the bracing air of the north improved her complexion. He found, to his deep irritation, that he had begun to look forward to breakfast. He caught himself choosing some sharp remark only to see how she would answer. And answer she always did, swift and dry, sending the footman behind her chair into fits of swallowed laughter. A house that had been a tomb for years had begun, somehow, to ring with the sound of a quarrel he did not want to win. One wet afternoon he set the chessboard between them, certain she did not play. She took the black pieces without comment and dismantled his defences with a cold, cheerful precision that left him staring at the ruin of his king. "My father taught me," she said, gathering the captured pieces into a neat little army, before the cards taught him to ruin us. A woman who cannot think 3 moves ahead is eaten alive in a drawing room. She raised her brows. Another, your grace. Or do you concede? He lost twice more before the rain stopped, and enjoyed each defeat more than any victory he could remember. She would not be cowed, and she would not sulk, and she would not, infuriatingly, hate him. Hatred he could have managed. He was used to being hated. What he did not know how to manage was a woman who treated his thunderous moods as one treats a spell of bad weather, certain it would pass. When he was curt, she was wry. When he was silent, she filled the silence with observations so sharp that he had to look fixedly at his plate to keep his face in order. One evening he came upon her in the library, curled in his own chair with one of his own books, her shoes off and her feet tucked beneath her like a girl. She did not leap up in confusion. She marked her place with her finger and looked at him over the page. "You have a great many books," she said, "for a man who frowns so much. I had supposed you spent your evenings counting your sins." "I had supposed," he said, "that guests asked leave before plundering a man's shelves." "I am not a guest. You have informed me at length that I am a purchase. A purchase may surely read." She turned the book so he could see the spine. "You have underlined half of this one. I disagree with nearly everything you have marked, which gives me a great deal to look forward to. We shall never want for quarrels." He should have rebuked her. He had rebuked Duke's sons for less. Instead, he drew the other chair near to hers and said, against every intention he had brought into the room, "Show me, then, where I am wrong." They argued until the candles guttered. She was not always right, but she was never dull. She gave ground when he made a fair point and took it back fiercely when he overreached, and somewhere in the second hour he stopped trying to win and began simply to listen to the sound of her thinking. At one turn she caught him in a contradiction with such delight, the candlelight on her cheek, that he forgot to defend himself and only watched her. He had been admired by women who wanted his name and feared by men who wanted his favor. He had never, he thought, been simply enjoyed before. When at last she yawned and admitted she could no longer see the page, he felt something he did not at first recognize. It was reluctance. He did not want the evening to end. He walked her to the foot of the stairs. At the bottom she paused, candle in hand, and looked back at him with sudden gravity. "You expected me to be afraid of you," she said quietly. "Everyone is. I have seen it all my life, the way the world bows to a title and forgets there is a man inside it. I think you have been alone a very long time, in the way that powerful men are alone, with everyone around them and no one beside them." She lifted the candle, as though to see him better. "I will not be afraid of you, but I would not mind, I think, being beside you." Then she went up and left him standing in the dark, undone by a poor woman in mended gloves. After that he stopped pretending. The cold guest room became, by his quiet order, the warm south chamber with windows on the rose garden. The seats at table grew side by side, and the dinners that had been silent grew so full of low laughter that the servants began to linger in the passage to listen. He took her riding and found she rode like one born to the saddle and feared nothing, not the high hedges, nor the cold river, nor him. She set her mare at a hedge he had thought too high and cleared it laughing, her hair coming loose behind her, and he knew then that he would spend the rest of his life chasing her over hedges and being glad of it. There came a night when a letter arrived from her eldest sister, and he watched the color leave her face as she read it by the candle. She said nothing of its contents. She only folded it very small and very carefully, as a woman folds a grief she means to carry alone. Roland did not press her. But the next morning, without a word, he sent his own physician and a quarter's worth of coal and provisions to the crumbling house where her sisters waited out the winter, and gave the order that nothing was ever to be lacking there again. He did not want her thanks. He wanted only to have lifted, in secret, some corner of the weight she had carried alone for so long. And when at last a grateful letter reached her, and she looked across the table at him with sudden, brimming understanding. He found that her wordless gratitude was worth more to him than all the deference of his life. He had learned by then that under all her brilliant armor she was tired, bone-tired, in the way of a woman who has carried a sinking family for years and never once been allowed to set it down, and he wanted, more than he had ever wanted silence or peace, to be the one who carried it with her. On the last evening of the month they walked in the garden under a skying gold and rose. The wager hung unspoken between them. At the end of the long walk he stopped, and she stopped, and the man who had ended careers with a sentence could not, for a moment, find his words. "You have won," he said at last. "Have I?" She did not pretend to misunderstand. "I do not recall what the stakes were." "Nor do I." He took a breath. "Lavinia, the day you came that you would beg me for mercy. I find it is I who must beg." He took her hand, the one with the mended glove she had never let him replace, and held it as though were the only solid thing in a shifting world. "I bought you as I might have bought a horse, and you walked into my house and were not afraid, and you have ruined me for every quiet evening I shall ever spend without you. I do not want a wife who cannot say no. I want you, who say no to me beautifully twice a day. Marry me. Not the debt, not the bargain, me. And if you must have your revenge, let me be the one who begs, since you say you never have." For the first time since he had known her, Lavinia Crewe had no ready answer. Her clear grey eyes filled, and she let them, without shame, because she had never been ashamed of anything. "I told you I had never begged for anything," she said unsteadily, "because I had never wanted anything badly enough to risk the refusal." Her fingers closed hard around his. "I am not begging now, Roland. I do not need to. You have already given it to me yourself, plainly, without the title in the way. That is the only thing I ever feared I could not have." She laughed, a wet and joyful sound. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. Though I warn you, I shall go on saying no to you about everything else for the rest of our lives." "I am counting on it," he said, and drew her to him, and held her there in the gold light as though he had at last come home. They were married before the limes lost their leaves, and her sisters wanted for nothing ever again. And in the long years that followed, and they were long, and they were happy, the Duke of Hawkmoor, who had once been feared in 3 counties, would tell anyone who asked that he had spent his whole life being a bide, and had not known a single hour of true happiness until the day a penniless woman in mended gloves looked him in the eye, refused to be afraid, and taught a proud man that the only mercy worth having is the kind 2 stubborn hearts grant each other, freely every day, for the rest of their lives.